So today I'm working on a 2016 Honda HRV, and I need to do a rear brake service for this vehicle. I had some trouble finding some information on YouTube on how to do the rear brakes. This vehicle has an electronic parking brake, and there's a gamut of videos on YouTube that show folks taking the servo motor on the back off in order to do the brake service. But I made this video for folks who may want to purchase a scan tool or may already have a scan tool available to do the rear brake service. I got this scan tool. It's a launch scan tool off of Amazon a few years ago for like a couple $100. So all I did here was plug it in, go to reset, brake reset, go to Honda, ignition switch is on, yes, this is the correct vehicle. Brake pad maintenance mode, stop the vehicle, release the parking brake, battery voltage is over 10 volts. In order to prevent voltage drop during the procedure, ensure vehicle battery is fully charged, which all of these conditions apply. Hit OK. Brake pads on the normal position. Do you want to execute pad exchange mode? Yes, I do. You probably can't hear it in the video, but you can hear the servo motors turning the pistons back in the caliper in order to do the brake pads. So transition to pad exchange mode has been completed. Perform rear brake pad maintenance. When the pad maintenance is complete, you must return to normal mode in order for the pad to return to the original position. Okay. And this question will get answered at the end of the brake job. So at this point, the e-brake, the electronic parking brake, has been taken care of in terms of pushing the servo motor back into its furthest most position so we can put the piston back in, which I'll show in the video as we proceed. So here we have the rear tire. I'm going to take the lug nuts off, which happen to be a 19 millimeter socket. I'm using this impact gun to get the wheel off. Have it jacked up, have a jack stand underneath the car just to make sure we're totally safe. And I'll take these lug nuts off. All right, so with the lug nuts off, you can kind of see the rotor and the brake pads along with the caliper. I'm going to need two hands to do the rest of this job, so I am going to take the procedure here and try to minimize it. But 13 millimeter here, if you crack this loose and this turns, you're going to want to put a 17 millimeter wrench right here and then turn it with the 13 on the actual bolt. And then the caliper bracket, once the caliper's off, the caliper bracket bolts, which I'm hoping I can show right here. 17 millimeter for those, and those come right out. So I will take this off and get right back. All right, so I'm back. The caliper bracket is now off. As you can see, the pads aren't in bad shape. The reason why I ended up doing the rear brakes, there's a pulsation in the pedal, and as you can see, these rotors are beat to hell. So pads and rotors in the rear, pads and rotors in the front, which I didn't record. Calipers here, this is already pushed back, meaning this is the servo motor that I kind of described in the beginning of the video, where people take off these Torx heads. I live in New England, so you can see how rusty and shitty these are, which is why I wouldn't recommend taking them off. If you live in a part of the country where it's not super rusty, you'd probably be okay without using the scan tool. But I had the scan tool already and just kind of wanted to make a video on that. I used this tool to get the caliper piston pushed back after the servo motor was already reset by the scan tool, or set back in its furthest position by the scan tool. You don't have to use a tool like this on this style of caliper. You can use a C-clamp or something like that to push the piston back. You're essentially just pushing it back into the caliper. You're not really twisting it. These notches are there for this tool, which I actually don't have the adapter to fit into those 3 notches, but to help you twist it back, but it's not essential. You just need to push the piston back on this style design of rear caliper with the electronic parking brake. What I'm gonna do next is I took this screw off that holds the caliper. It looks just like this. I used this impact hammer I got from Harbor Freight, stuck it in, smashed the back here with a hammer, this part here with a hammer, to loosen that screw. Don't just use a screwdriver, you'll probably strip it out and have to drill it out. And I ended up ordering new screws on Amazon, just because they were cheap and I didn't really want to reuse the old ones. So what I'm going to do next, take the rotor off, put the new screw into the new rotor, and then reassemble it, and you'll see what it looks like reassembled. So here's the new rotor with the new screw. All I did was literally pop the other one off with a hammer, take the new rotor, put it on. This is a coated rotor, which I ordered from Rock Auto along with the brake pads. Put a new screw in. That's what the old rotor on the back side looked like. So, which explains the pulsation and why I'm changing the rotors and pads. So now what I'm going to do now is the opposite of what I did to begin. I'm going to replace these pads, replace the hardware, lube these pins, lube the sides of the pads that go into the hardware, put it all back together. It should be right as rain. So be back in a minute. So what I do with these slides is I pull them out of the bay here. I lube them up, I push them back in. If you really want to be neurotic, you could take them out completely, clean them, take these rubber boots off, and clean the hole. I think it's kind of overkill, so I don't do that. But what I do as well is once I take the old hardware off, I use a wire brush and I clean the inside with brake clean, just to make sure that mating surface is going to be good for the new hardware. This is the new hardware right here. And so all I'm going to do is push that on both sides, throw the pads in, bracket's good to go. Be back in a minute. So here are the new pads with the new hardware, lubed up. I really just lube up the sides here. These are the old pads. I know one common issue that some less experienced folks may have is they may take these off and not know. They notice the squealer on this pad and not on this one, and you say, oh, which one am I supposed to put in which orientation? Well, the dead giveaway is the circle is where the caliper is, which is why that circle's on that pad, and this pad, or the backing plate on this pad, matches the curvature of the caliper. So you can tell the squeal tab is going to go on the innermost pad, and the outermost pad is going to be the one without the squeal tab. Also, most brake sets have squeal tabs either on all the pads or usually just two. Orientation of that matters as well. So the other side, the squeal tab would be here. As you can see, it's the same because I already did the other side and figure that out. So now what I'm going to do is put back the 17 millimeter bolts that go here onto the spindle of the vehicle. 13 millimeter bolt back here. I'm going to torque the 17 millimeter bolts with a torque wrench right here to 80 foot-pounds. These 13 millimeters are 37 foot-pounds, which I'm just quite frankly going to do by hand. That's such a little torque. Doing it by hand is plenty. So I'm going to put them back on. The brake job should be done. Be back in a minute. All right, so here's the finished product. Calipers on, bolts are tightened to the torque spec. One thing I wanted to mention about the torque spec, that is the torque spec that I got for the caliper bolts, the caliper bracket bolts and the caliper bolts. I got online. I didn't get it from like a Honda service manual or anything. So I would do your due diligence and just ensure that the torque spec is correct when you do this. And you can get that from a variety of different places, but just make sure you get it from a trusted source and not some random guy on the internet like this video is doing. So, double check those specs and make sure they're correct. I read 37 for the top, 80 for the bottom, and that's what I went with. I'm going to put the wheel on next, which I'm not going to record because that's pretty straightforward. The torque spec that I'm going to use for the wheel is 90, which I also got online, but also with past knowledge working in the trade, all of the torque specs provided in this video, in my opinion, are more than enough to ensure that everything's on the way it needs to be. But again, do your due diligence, make sure you're safe, and get the spec from Honda. Be back in a minute. All right, so wheels back on, lug nuts are torqued to 90 foot-pounds. I'm gonna go back into the vehicle and get it out of the maintenance mode. Sorry, bear with me here. So, scan tool's still on, I haven't touched it. Did you finish the rear brake pad maintenance? Sorry, camera's having trouble focusing. I'm just gonna hit OK. Brake pad position, return to normal brake pad position. Caution, execution time may take up to 25 seconds. OK. Wrong condition, check the following conditions are fulfilled. Stop vehicle, release the parking brake. There are no DTCs. OK. Turn the ignition switch off. OK. Turn the ignition switch on. OK. And that should be it. One thing you're going to want to do is check the brake master cylinder reservoir. Sometimes when you compress calipers, it can cause the cap to come off or come loose, and you want to just make sure that's tight. On this vehicle, it'll probably be less of a concern because I think it's a thread-on type, not a push-on type, but either way, check it. I'm going to post this video. Like I said, this is specific to the scan tool. There are more detailed videos on how to do the rear brakes on this vehicle on YouTube already. I just couldn't find one that involved using a scan tool to get the servo motor to go back into its furthest most position. If you would like the video or comment on the video, this is actually my first video I've ever recorded for YouTube, and I did it just because I couldn't find one that had the content that I was looking for, so I made my own. But yeah, leave any comments, feedback, critiques, questions. I'm not going to put anything in the description quite yet for tools and whatnot. If people have questions, I'll throw it in there. But I appreciate you guys watching, and have a great day. Good luck out there doing your brakes.